Hi, and welcome to Follow's weekly message podcast. Thanks for joining us. We hope this message inspires you and helps you to follow Jesus in your community for his glory. Here's the message.
So this morning, we're continuing on with our Mature Disciples series. Now, for those at home, you've probably already seen the title of this morning's sermon is Discipline and Encouragement, which sounds like a very, very strange mixture. When I first started to write it down and see it, I kept on thinking of an episode of The Simpsons where Homer, the really bad dad as usual, is trying to work out if a snake is poisonous by using a taser to get Bart to touch it. And he's doing the whole touch it, or else. That's not exactly what this morning's sermon is looking at. So before we jump into the sermon, does everybody get their Bibles out and turn to Colossians 2, verse 1 to 7. I want you to know how much I am struggling for you and for those at Laodicea and for all who have not met me personally. My purpose is that they may be encouraged in heart and united in love, so that they may have the full riches of complete understanding, in order that they may know the mystery of God, namely Christ, in whom are hidden all the treasures of wisdom and knowledge. I tell you this so that no one may deceive you by fine-sounding arguments. For though I am absent from you in body, I am present with you in spirit, and delight to see how orderly you are and how firm your faith in Christ is. So then, just as you received Christ Jesus as Lord, continue to live in him, rooted and built up in him, strengthened in the faith as you were taught, and overflowing with thankfulness. Now, today my sermon's going to be a little bit different to what I normally do, because when I first sat down and went through this chapter, there was a power in it that I'd never ever experienced before. And when I first went through it, I went, okay, so what I'm going to look at that's a key element of being a mature disciple is discipline. But then I found God wrestling with me as I went through this. And one of the things I've learned over the years is that if God's wrestling with you, you'll always lose. So I decided I'll take on board what I'm feeling pressured to do here and look at the second part of this as well. So I'm going to look at the discipline, which is a very key element of being a mature disciple, but I'm also going to take a look at encouragement, because I think sometimes we forget to encourage those that are around us that are serving. So this morning, my sermon itself is going to kind of take on a little bit of a feel of a testimony as well, with some of the things that I've experienced with my walk with God over the years and my walk in ministry. Now, the power of what we read from the Bible, for me, comes from the fact that this is being written by Paul while he is in prison. Now, if you could imagine a letter from a prisoner, normally it might be telling you how to make gravy, if you're a Paul Kelly fan. It could also be about how you're suffering. You would expect to read this and expect the person to be saying, I'm really struggling here. The food is terrible. I can't get out to see anybody. I'm sleep deprived. All the things that you think about that go on with a prison. Now, historians will probably tell you that Paul was possibly doing house prison here or house arrest. So perhaps it was a little bit easier, but still, it's very tough. As we've all experienced over the last 2 years, being trapped inside your house and not being able to go anywhere is a pretty tough experience, both spiritually and mentally. So what I felt with this was this power that Paul is so disciplined that he's not whining and whinging about where he is. He's offering encouragement and advice to the people that he is writing to. Somehow he's able to shut out everything that's affecting him personally, and instead he realizes that he needs to encourage those around him. So why did this piece speak so strongly to me? Well, this year turned out very, very different to how I expected it to be. During the COVID 2 years, the ministry that I do some work for outside of Follow gained a corporate sponsor, which was going to mean that this year my role was going to be traveling around to different churches, traveling around to different zoos and wildlife parks, educating people on how they can help the environment around them. I should tell you a little bit about our ministry. So our ministry basically educates people on how we can help the environment as Christians, how we can make our churches palm oil free and things like that. We also offer spiritual advice and chaplaincy to other organisations in the environmental field like Sea Shepherd, Greenpeace, people like that. So it's a pretty full-on job. And the fact that we now had sponsorship was going to mean that I was going to be able to go to different churches, different wildlife parks, zoos. There was even talk about going overseas to countries like Borneo and being able to educate myself further. At the same time, I also landed a job with a radio station that I've been dreaming about working for since I was a little kid. So this year was going to be an absolutely fantastic year, chockers full of things to do. And then all of a sudden during summer, I got bitten by a mosquito that was carrying Ross River virus. So I went through that, starting to come out the other side. Now, if anyone hasn't had Ross River virus, it basically leaves you absolutely exhausted. You get out of bed and 2 hours later, you're ready to go back to bed because you've got dizziness, headache, and your whole body is hurting. So I just started to get over that, and I thought, great, this year's finally going to kick in. I'm going to be able to do the things that I'm going to be able to do, and I caught COVID. And on top of that, COVID decided to leave me with a lung infection for 6 weeks. So this year hasn't exactly gone to plan. And as I look back over these past few months, I've actually found myself really glad that this happened to me now in my walk with Christ and my walk with faith, because if it had happened to me 15, 20 years ago, I probably would have thrown everything in. I probably would have started to walk away from the ministries that I was involved with, and I probably would have found myself blaming God for the way that I was feeling, and I would have disassociated myself from church. So what's the difference that's happened in the last 15, 20 years in my life? And I would have to say that one of the big differences that I've felt in my life has been this church and the people that I've met here. Because when I came to Follow on day one of the church, I was absolutely broken. I'd put my heart and soul into a ministry at another church, and by the end of it, I was done. I felt like everything that I'd done at that church had been thrown in my face. And personally, I felt like I'd been completely chewed up and spat out. In fact, the first time I walked into Follow, I was wondering why God had ever made me walk down that path at the other church. And in my head, I'd basically checked out. I told myself that I was ready to walk away from church completely. I was done. And in fact, the first couple of times I came to Follow, I was kind of like a petulant child. My wife was dragging me along. And even though I was attending church deep down, I was telling myself that I was going to refuse to get involved with anything at the church, and I'd just be a Sunday Christian. My discipline as a Christian had gone out the window, and my faith was going with it very, very quickly. I was no longer surrounding myself with Christians. I wasn't reading my Bible regularly, and I certainly wasn't praying every day. Now, when I think about discipline as a Christian, I'm not talking about punishment. I'm talking about the kind of discipline that a sports person has to have to find success. And you could be the most talented sports person in the world with all the skills required to be number one, but if you're not going to be willing to eat properly or train each day, when it comes to game day, you're not going to be able to perform to the point that you succeed. And we've seen that time and time again with sport over the years. We've heard of stories where players have wanted to go out and party during the week, or they want to go and eat McDonald's and KFC. They don't want to listen to their coaches, and pretty soon they end up losing their careers. Now, when I found myself at my low point in my faith, I found that two things snapped me out of it. Firstly, through God's own will, I found myself involved in a project for God. Now, I'm not even sure, and I can't remember why we even went there, but my wife and I went to this conference called Surrender up at Belgrave Heights. Basically, what Surrender is it's a huge expo where a whole bunch of ministries that don't normally get the chance to talk to people are able to present what they do and look for people to volunteer with them and to look for support. And we'd been walking around all day and looking at all the different things that were there, and that night, this amazing woman got up to speak about her ministry. And it was a ministry that she'd set up because she often felt that Christians had forgotten about God's words in Genesis, where he told humanity to look after the animals that he'd placed on earth. And as an animal lover, I kind of found myself drawn to her words because I'd never really heard of a ministry before that centered around animals. And the more and more I listened to her talk, I kind of felt God using his big shepherd's crook and pushing me towards her table and saying, go and talk to this lady some more. By the end of the night, I'd signed up for more information, and inside I was kind of still doing this thing where I was like, nah, don't want to get involved with them because I'm just going to end up getting hurt. But at the same time, I was like, yeah, I will, I'll sign up. So I signed up, and then soon as I signed up, someone reached out to me from the ministry, and I realized that if I wanted to get involved with them, there was a little bit of a catch. If I wanted to start doing some things for them with ministry, I also had to sign up to their Bible study and prayer group. And for a minute, I was like, no way. Don't want to get involved with that. But as it would happen, the first topic they looked at in their Bible study was titled, Improving Your Relationship with God. Now, if that's not God just taking a huge amount of bricks and just going, bang, that's what you need, I don't know what is. So I found myself doing this Bible study, and as I started to read through the Bible, it felt like they were taking parts out that I really needed to hear at that moment. And the more I read, the more I prayed with this group, I felt my faith returning. Now, at the same time, I felt follow having a huge impact on my life as well. My wife, Lee, she jumped in and made a whole load of new friends, and suddenly I found myself going along to these events and dinners and lunches, and once again, I found myself surrounded by Christians, but the difference was these were positive Christians. I'd realized that where I'd been previously, there were a lot of negative Christians, and that had dragged me down. Being around these positive Christians, it started to encourage me, and it genuinely helped me get my relationship with God back on track. Now, one of those Christians that was there then, but had also been in my life previously, is someone who is so dear to so many of us here this morning, Peter Brown. Now, Pete, or Mr. Brown as he was to me when I first met him because I was a little kid, was someone who had always played an important part in my walk with God. Now, I think I first met him when I was in Sunday school. He was certainly there for me in my teenage years at youth group. And whenever he saw me at church, he was always one of those people that would come up to me and ask me how I was going. And then when I started getting into ministry as a youngster, he would always take the time at a church service, whether it be before or after, to sit down and pray with me, talk to me, and he told me that I would always be in his prayers. Now, flash forward several years, and Pete and I were at different churches. But whenever we ran into each other at events, he would always do the same thing. He would take me to the side, he would talk to me, see how whatever ministry I was involved in that time was going, and we'd end up catching up like old times. Then on the darkest day of my life, when my partner passed away, Pete was the first person on my doorstep to make sure that I was doing okay. And at Follow, Pete was the same. Even when he was at his very sickest, we would talk, and I would start by asking him how he was going and want to talk to him about what he was going through. But he would always turn the conversation around and straight away start to talk to me about my faith, where I was at, and my mission work. And that to me was something that I couldn't comprehend at the time. It was, to me, the sign of a very, very mature Christian that is at the lowest point of their life, but they want to reach out and encourage others. And I guess as I was preparing this sermon, I started to ask myself, well, where am I at now? And I think it's a question that we all need to ask ourselves. Where is our relationship with God at? Are you disciplined enough to be able to put aside whatever you have happening in your life to encourage others around you with what they're doing? Our church here at Follow is blessed with so many volunteers. As I look around me here this morning, I see that so many aspects of our church wouldn't be able to run without volunteers. Even the ability to have a service here this morning happens because of the work of volunteers. This morning, while many of us were probably still in bed, there were people here setting up chairs, setting up the stage. Then, of course, we have the people come in to set up all of the audio. We have the worship team here early practicing. Everything that you see here right now is because of volunteers. Now, if you can be a volunteer and help within your church, that's great. But maybe you can't. Maybe your health prevents you. Maybe your work hours prevent you from doing so. And even maybe life itself. Maybe there's so much going on in your life that you just can't take that time to volunteer. But there are other ways that you can help. Look back to Paul and his letter here. Now, he would love to have been able to visit this church in person. He probably would have loved to preach to them and been really hands-on, but circumstances prevented him from doing so. But those circumstances didn't prevent him from encouraging those that were doing so. So how do you show that maturity as a Christian and encourage others? Maybe it's just simply being able to sit down and pray for someone that you know who's volunteering and is going through a tough time. Maybe it's just about sitting down and praying about a certain ministry. Or maybe like Paul, it's like writing words of encouragement to them. Remember a couple of weeks ago when Andy Staunton stood up here and was talking about his time overseas, he said one of the things that really encouraged him was receiving letters from Ray Granger, someone he'd never met, but they were letters of encouragement and they'd meant so much to him. Maybe if there's a younger person or a new Christian, you can encourage them to find their own walk with God. And that doesn't have to be giving guidance or teaching them how to do a role in the church or anything like that. For me, I struggle having one-on-one conversations with people that I don't know. So nothing would scare me more than standing at the front door every Sunday morning and welcoming people as they came into church. But that doesn't stop me from encouraging those that do. In fact, I probably should point out about now that there's a big difference between encouraging and pushing somebody into something. Because just because you're passionate about a certain ministry or have been given a special gift from God Doesn't mean to say that people around you have the same calling. Now, I found this out the hard way a few years ago. Lee and I went with a couple of friends to Asia, and while I was there, I decided to drop in on one of the World Wildlife Fund tiger reserves that we quite often work with over here. Now, when we were going to the park, I hadn't noticed the fear in our friends' eyes at going to a tiger park. Rebecca was asking me a bunch of questions in the bus on the way there, such as, how close do we get to the tigers? And knowing how these parks operate, I said, we'll probably be able to go right up to them. I didn't notice the fear in her eyes at that time. And to me, that was natural, because part of what we do with our work is every now and then we do what we call getting our Irwin on, which means getting into an enclosure with the animals to do a talk. Now, I'd done my basic tiger training. I knew the different rules with a tiger. If you're in an enclosure with a tiger and you're doing a talk, don't let them go behind you, because if they go behind you, the one way a tiger loves to show affection is to nip the back of your calf. Now, that's great when they do it to another tiger, because tigers have very, very strong back legs. But when they do it to a human, it normally means 20 stitches in the back of your leg and a trip to hospital. So I knew the basics, and including one of those basics is when you're going into an enclosure with a tiger, read the body language of the tiger, and if he doesn't want you there, don't stay. Pretty basic. Now, when we got to this park, the first thing they did was sat down with us and said, you guys need to sign some paperwork. Now, number one on the paperwork was in broken English, so that everybody could understand it, the words, if you die in our park today, your family won't sue us, and if you get injured by a tiger, you won't sue us. Now, I signed it straight away, because I'm kind of used to having to sign that kind of thing. Our friends freaked. They decided that their closeness to a tiger would be sitting in the coffee shop having a coffee while we went in and had the experience with the tigers. I found out later, as they were sitting in that coffee shop, what they were thinking about was how they were going to tell Lee and I's parents that we'd been killed by a tiger in a wildlife park. So as you can see, something that was my calling was not our friends' calling. In fact, it absolutely terrified them. So moving on from that, how do we make sure that we're mature enough as Christians and disciples to be able to help others when we are struggling ourselves? Now, I feel the best way to be able to look at that is to go back to my analogy of a sports person. First of all, as a Christian, we need to train. Now, how does a sports person train? They go to training sessions. So what's a training session for a Christian? It's church, it's small groups, it's hanging out with Christian friends. One of the things I think that really got me through the last few months and kept me on my walk with God was the fact of what's happened over the last couple of years. During the last couple of years, even though we've been separated from each other, I found myself getting so close to the people in this church that I'm friends with that it's really hard to explain. When people say to me, the last couple of years have been tough because I've been so isolated, I found I'd actually experienced the opposite. Because one of the things I was able to do in the last couple of years that I didn't normally be able to do was go and help out with the Blessed Collective and things like that, unpacking food, but just being able to talk to the other volunteers that were there and helping them. I also had some amazing conversations with Pastor Luke, Josiah, and Pastor Adam being in the office every day. And you just find that being able to sit down and talk sometimes, you learn so much more than what you think you're going to be able to. The same with my small groups. I am so thankful for being in Paul and Jen's small group for so long because our group became so tight. We were there for each other whenever we were struggling. We had these amazing conversations. I know Paul and I had these awesome conversations afterwards where we'd talk about what we'd just learnt in the small group, but also talk about how it fit into the world at that time. Now, the second thing that a sports person has to do to be able to be at the peak of their career is they have to eat properly. And as Christians, we have to nourish ourselves properly as well. So that doesn't mean that as a Christian you have to follow a certain diet. Now, my ministry that I work for, they would say that you should have a palm oil-free diet. But our nourishment is the Bible. And again, that might be a small group environment. It might be an online Bible study. I do an online Bible study at the moment, and I have to say they're absolutely fantastic. In fact, I'm doing 2. And the reason why I find an online Bible study is so helpful is I do it every day when I'm on the train on the way to work. I have an hour and 10 minutes into the city and an hour and 10 minutes back. So I get 2 hours and 20 minutes every day to sit down and go through my Bible and my Bible study. And again, one of the things I find about reading the Bible is you can set yourself different challenges. You can set yourself a challenge to read a certain book and to go through that. But one of the things I find is that quite often God will direct you to the right spot in the Bible for you at that time. And that's one of the reasons why I love doing an online Bible study, because I keep on finding with them that if there's something at that time that I'm questioning or I'm having an issue with, quite often that Bible study will address that. So I really, really encourage you to read your Bible every day, but also get involved with something like a Bible study where you can ask questions, but also go deeper than the book itself to learn more. Now, of course, the last thing that a sports person needs to be able to do is to listen to their coach. So who is the coach of a Christian? Who teaches us and directs us to live our best way under God? Now, I mentioned before that part of what really helped me with the last few months and how tough they have been was the discussions that I had with people like Pastor Luke over the last couple of years. As I mentioned, being part of a Bible study group, those people help you more than you can ever imagine. So if you haven't had that chance to be able to sit down and talk to somebody, and it doesn't have to be a pastor, it doesn't have to be a small group leader, maybe it's just a Christian that you really, really admire, I can guarantee you that you will get so much out of that. But before I close, I want to talk about someone in the Bible that I think quite often gets overlooked, but I see her as one of the most mature Christians that I think you'll ever find, and that's Mary Magdalene. And ironically, my first ever sermon at Follow was on Mary. And when I think of mature Christians now, who are completely disciplined, I think of Mary, especially with the way that she reacted after Jesus' crucifixion. Now, you had other disciples hiding from the authorities, depressed, giving up on everything. Then you have Mary. She goes to the grave early in the morning to once again serve her Lord. She is then one of the first to believe that Jesus has risen, and she doesn't doubt it. She just believes because she obviously knew all of the prophecies. She believed God's words and promises to her, and she even encourages those that are around her who are doubting to believe. So to close, I want to ask you, are you like Mary? Do you want to serve and encourage others when you're going through the same tough time as they are? Or are you like Paul? If you were in a prison cell, would you be sitting in there complaining about being trapped, or would you be like him and reaching out to others and encouraging them? I'll leave you to think about that. But I really, really encourage you, like I said, to do the 3 things that we talked about. Listen to your coach, train, and eat the right food, i.e. the Bible. Go out and also encourage each other. If you think that there's someone in your life that needs encouragement at the moment? They probably do. And it's probably been put on your heart to encourage them. Let's finish with a prayer. Jesus, most loving Saviour, thank you for your gift of salvation. Today I come before you with gratitude in my heart for the mercy and grace that you show me each day. Thank you for your patience, understanding, strength and wisdom that you have already provided. May it be manifested within me and transferred to those around me. May I be a blessing to those I interact with on a daily basis, encouraging and sharing your light with them. I ask this in your name. Amen.
Thanks for joining us for our weekly message. If you live in Melbourne South East, we'd love for you to join us for our Sunday morning service. All the details can be found on our website, follow.church. You can also follow us on social media @Follow Baptist Church.